Hello and welcome to Hot Cup of Jazz. My name's Josh. This is my jazz podcast where I talk about everything jazz whilst drinking a cup of tea. Today I've just got a black tea. It's delicious. It's warming because it's cold outside, and it goes perfectly with the jazz albums I've selected here to talk about today. So as you can tell from the title, today I wanted to talk about 5 jazz albums that are sort of left of field that I would recommend to anyone who doesn't know if they like jazz, hasn't listened to jazz before, just kind of an introduction into the world of jazz. Because I was reflecting the other day that oftentimes people who recommend jazz albums and all the top lists and stuff you come across the internet, they're often leading with Kind of Blue by Miles Davis and followed up with Love Supreme by John Coltrane. And to me, whilst those are amazing albums and really took jazz in a new direction in both of those cases, I think that those albums can be quite intimidating to start with because they are the jazz albums that everyone knows, that everyone's at least heard the title of before. So I think that it, and I mean, everyone's spoken about these albums before, so I thought it might be a good idea to put my 2 cents in with some kind of left of field recommendations, things that you might not have heard of. I mean, some of them are still quite popular albums, but they're not as popular as the 2 albums I've mentioned previously. So I wanted to start off with, I purchased this album recently to add to my collection, but this is My Funny Valentine by Chet Baker. Now, if you don't know, Chet Baker was a jazz trumpeter and then became more known as a jazz vocalist. This album in particular, My Funny Valentine, was released in 1953, and it's just such a perfect album to start with if you've never listened to jazz or not quite sure if you like jazz or not quite sure if you know what it's about. This album, Chet Baker in general is a great person to go and listen to if you want to hear these standards, the songs that are played quite often in jazz, in their most simplest, straight-ahead form. He doesn't do anything too crazy with the melodies. He keeps everything pretty as it was written. Which is good when you're starting out because you want to be able to hear that. And what else is great about this album is that you hear him sing and you also hear him on the trumpet. There's a lot of albums where it's either just him singing or just him on the trumpet, whereas this one's a nice mix. He'll sing the head, and then later on in the song he'll chuck down oftentimes quite a simple trumpet solo, but it's just lovely. The tonality of his voice and his trumpet playing are just so interesting and lovely to listen to. So I definitely recommend. I'll put the links wherever I can for all of these albums for you to go and listen to them, pick them up if you're into that, all that kind of thing. So definitely first off the rank, My Funny Valentine by Chet Baker. Give it a listen. It's beautiful music, and it really does kind of show you from the simple side of things what jazz is all about. Following up with that, kind of keeping in the vocalist sort of range, I wanted to talk about Ella Fitzgerald. Now, that's a name that everyone should know. I think that her vocals and the way that she sang jazz, no one else has ever been able to hit the same mark. Every single song that she turned her vocal cords to just came out glittering and sounding amazing, and she could swing, and a lot of people don't know that she can actually play the piano really well as well. She was first and foremostly a jazz pianist in the early days before she found her populace with her singing. And the album I want to recommend for Ella Fitzgerald is Ella Fitzgerald Sings Gershwin. Gershwin's a composer. He composed quite a few jazz standards. And so this album's another, similar to Chet Baker, it's another great album to listen to kind of get the origins and the simplicity and all that kind of stuff that jazz starts with. It's a great album. I mean, anything of Ella's you could chuck on and it will be amazing. But in particular, I wanted to talk about this Sings Gershwin. Ella Fitzgerald sings Gershwin, and it was recorded the 11th of September 1950. Now, you'll notice as I go through this, a lot of these albums that I've selected, in fact, I'm looking over the list now, all of them are from the 50s. I don't know what that says about the state of jazz in the 50s, but it was a great time for jazz music. So moving out of the kind of vocalist simple style, I wanted to go straight into one of the big ones. Now, this is someone that, this album probably would be on a mainstream list, although having said that, I don't think I've seen it, but it should be. But I've included it in this left of field anyway because it's just such a great album and you have to listen to it. This is one of this album's by one of my favorite jazz pianists. I just love everything about the way he interacts with the piano and his attitude towards jazz. It's just everything about it is amazing and so dedicated and so focused and detail orientated. And that is Bill Evans and his album Portrait in Jazz, which was recorded December 28, 1959. So right on the cusp of going into the 1960s, Bill Evans sat down with his trio and recorded this. And this was actually, apparently, I think, a couple of months after he was on the session with Miles Davis on the Kind of Blue album. So 1959 was a huge year for Bill Evans. But this album is just, if you like piano, regardless of genre, this album you have to listen to. And Bill Evans in general. It's so swinging. It's the tone that he gets out of the piano, the production is amazing, and everything about it is just a great listen. Definitely listen to Portrait in Jazz by Bill Evans. And I mean, the cover art on this, cover photo on this album is amazing as well. It's just him in this like 1950s style with these big bold glasses, and I kind of aspire to be everything that album kind of portrays. So then, continuing with piano, I also wanted to, now this one really is left of field. I haven't seen this on any main lists, but it's a great album, and I stumbled across it by happenstance. But it is Ahmad's Blues by Ahmad Jamal. It's a live album. It was recorded at the Spotlight Club in 1958, September 6th, 1958. And it's a great album. What I love about this and why I've included it is because you can hear the kind of the atmosphere and the vibe in the room at the Spotlight Club on that evening while Ahmad Jamal's just absolutely destroying it and playing just this beautiful music. You can hear the clinking of cutlery and people chatting in the background, and it gives you a great kind of picture of what it's like to, or what it would have been like to attend a jazz gig back when it was more popular music, when it was kind of, a classy thing. You go, I mean, it's still classy now, but it's just not as mainstream as it used to be. And it's just a great album for sitting back and soaking in that vibe and really enjoying the music as if you were in the room there listening live. I struggle to listen to a lot of live recordings because sometimes the production quality is not there. It's too roomy, all that kind of thing. But this album is just great. Give it a listen, and I'm sure that you'll love it. So finally, I wanted to go with, because I'd covered vocals, I've covered a bit of trumpet with Chet Baker, we've done piano massively. I wanted to include, one of the massive instruments in jazz is obviously the saxophone. Like a lot of people, when they think jazz, they instantly go saxophone and then maybe piano. That's kind of it is the biggest instrument in the form, I would say. Not necessarily the greatest, but it is a huge one. And so I needed to include a saxophonist, and I went with Cannonball Adderly and his album Bohemia After Dark. Now, this album is definitely a bit bebop. It's very swinging. It can be quite fast. There are a few ballads in there for if you prefer that kind of slower pace, but this is also everything that jazz can be about. His phrasing, the way he plays on the saxophone, is just amazing. I mean, who doesn't want to listen to a guy named Cannonball? That's an epic name. So definitely listen to Bohemia After Dark by Cannonball Adderly. It was recorded on June 28 and July 14 of 1955. And it's just got some amazing tracks, and it's so swinging, and you can just jive along to it and really appreciate all the amazing musicianship that is on that album. And I mean, on all the albums that I've recommended, I mean, obviously these are the pros. They know how to play their instruments. They know how to tell us a story, how to kind of get across their ideas through their instrument straight to the listeners and to the consumers. So those are my 5 semi-left of field recommendations for anyone who, I mean, straight up loves jazz, but also doesn't really get it or wants to get into it more or has never listened to it properly before. Listen to these 5 albums. Let me know what you think. And I'm sure that you will absolutely love them. So as always, as I'm finishing up, I just want to say, come across, if you love jazz and you want to hear me talk about it, give you recommendations, or you just love music, come across to my Instagram at HotCupOfJazz, where I give primarily modern jazz recommendations, because I know, classic jazz, a lot of people talk about. Modern jazz is this thing that I feel like is very underrepresented at the moment. It's very hard to get your hands on the music and to keep across what's happening. So I love being able to research that and get out recommendations to you. So come across to Hot Cup of Jazz at HotCupOfJazz at Instagram. I've also got a YouTube page which I will be using a little bit more going forward, which is also Hot Cup of Jazz. Search it, follow it. You'll see some stuff on there. And then obviously if you're listening to this, you're at my SoundCloud, Hot Cup of Jazz. Give it a follow. Give me a like, comment, send me an email, get in touch. We can talk jazz. I'd love to hear from you. But until next week, keep it in the pocket and keep listening to jazz.